Hey gang, hello and welcome to Best Practices for Managing Atlassian Stack. I'm Sarah Hill. When I'm not in a genie box, this is what we call the boxes here. I run a virtual reality company in Columbia, Missouri, and we are so glad to have you all here today. We're going to have a great discussion with some great experts with some information that you need to know. So we want to welcome the folks from Contegix and from all of you really who've joined us all around the nation to talk more about managing your Atlassian Stack. So we have some housekeeping notes that we want to get into, but before we do that, we want to tell you what you're going to learn. So today you're going to learn about the typical Atlassian environment and what is it, how to utilize monitors to optimize your instance, determining the best backup and recovery approach, and also disaster recovery for worst case scenarios. So we're glad you're here. We hope that you're able to hear us and see us as well, and we want to make sure that you all know that we want you to contribute to the conversation. So how do you do that? It's by showing your faces. So right now, I know we have some shy individuals there in the audience who has their video muted, but if you go to the bottom of your screen, and if you would unmute your video so we can see your beautiful eyes and your beautiful faces, that we might be able to interact with you. And this is a two-way broadcast. So I'm not just talking with you, Don and Josh aren't just talking at you. We are all having a conversation together. So that's the best way that we can learn, and we certainly want you to participate in that conversation. So unmute your video and get ready to ask some questions. The easiest way to ask questions, you don't have to wait till we call on you to ask questions. Ask them while Josh and Don are talking, and we'll make sure that we get to them ASAP. If you go to the bottom of your screen and click on the participants icon, that's where you can raise your hand. And once you raise your hand, go ahead and raise your hand. And I can see those of you who've raised your hands. So click on participants and raise your hand. We're able to call on you, and then we are able to, thank you, Miguel, for raising your hand, and also Joshua as well. We're able to call on you, and then you can type your questions in chat. You can make sure that they get to you. So I love seeing faces. Joshua, thank you for showing your face as well. Hey, DePaul, good to see you too. Melissa, Brad, Delphine, and Eric, we are glad that you joined us here for this GenieCast. So let's get started right into the bulk of what we're going to talk about today. And I want to start with some introductions with Josh and Don here. So Josh Boyvan, he is a shift lead at Contegix Hosting, and he's maintained Atlassian environments for more than 3 years. Hey, how you doing, Josh?
Pretty good. Yourself?
Good. Anxious to hear what you have to say today. Also, Don West, he's a sales engineer at Contegix Hosting, and he's helped customers build highly optimized Atlassian environments for more than 5 years. So Contegix engineers here, we're so glad that you are sharing your expertise with us and everyone else. And let's get started with our conversation. So Josh and Don are going to talk about best practices for managing your Atlassian environments. So Contegix supported hundreds of Atlassian environments. And after seeing so many different requirements, different client sizes over the years, what does the typical Atlassian environment look like?
Yeah, that's kind of a loaded question. We've seen so many different varieties that we've seen everything from small development shops that might just be new to agile practice and using these tools, all the way up to Fortune 500 and Fortune 50 companies and everything in between.
Yeah, we usually see, like Don said, usually small development shops either jumping straight in, first system they use, first stack they've used, or we see bigger enterprises where a department will start using Jira to start managing their issues and whatnot in-house, and then that spreads like wildfire throughout the rest of the company. Those are traditionally the two biggest we see. Other types of uses are big public documentation sites for Confluence usage.
Yeah, so it's a pretty fair mix of, private kind of intranet type situations, and then public websites and public apps where people are going out to actually access documents.
Okay. Enterprise teams, you mentioned that as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the enterprise teams are more challenging in a lot of cases because, typically when you're working with a small shop, you have a lot of immediacy and you can talk to those decision makers and kind of get all the setups and configurations pretty immediately. Sometimes the larger enterprises actually have a pretty significant change control process, and it might take a couple of weeks to schedule an update that we could perform, within a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and a lot of the growth pains we see for those enterprise customers is one or two departments getting in, having very, very custom workflows, things like that, and that's scaling up to the rest of the company, and it just it causes some performance problems without some heavy tuning and some rework of those workflows.
Well, let's talk about some of the challenges that are out there, and you guys can talk about some of the solutions. And again, if you're just joining us, we are having a conversation about managing Atlassian environments. I'm Sarah Hill, I'm your genie, talking with Josh and Don here about some of those challenges. What's the most common challenge you would say that your customers face when trying to manage their Atlassian stack?
Yeah, and I think Josh and I are going to have maybe some different takes on this question. But from the front end, when we're working with clients that are new clients for the first time, typically, some of the most challenging aspects that they have are, they're developers. They manage development teams. They're not necessarily systems administrators. So whereas, we have tons of experience managing and maintaining the underlying infrastructure and all these kind of base level configurations, their teams don't necessarily have that experience. So for us, from the sales and kind of the initial approach side of things, oftentimes the biggest challenge is just the skill set required to do the maintenance and upgrades.
Yeah, and a lot with, like I said before, with the bigger instances, scaling the application itself, making sure that your database is tuned. If you're doing anything custom, keep an eye with your DBA on what indexes need to be created, that kind of stuff in the low-level system.
So let's talk a little bit about metrics and monitoring. How does Contegix use metrics and monitoring tools, metrics collection, to optimize your clients' instances?
So we try to collect everything we can on a customer server, customer's instance, things like that. From the low-level system, we collect all metrics on CPU utilization, memory utilization, disk performance. In the application itself, we hook into the JVM and kick out, heap statistics, garbage collection statistics, things like that we can use for historical, taking a look at how you're growing, and use in the moment of when you're having problems to see if, is the application hung due to excessive garbage collection? Do we need to take a look at what the heap settings are, things like that. It allows us to have insight into what the application's actually consuming and doing to allow us to make intelligent decisions on how we configure it and maintain it going forward.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that too, the monitoring is just like anything else in IT, it's kind of a layered approach. We're looking at some of the base level metrics for the hardware, so the physical servers or the virtual machines that the instances are running on. So we're doing things like looking for predictive failure and wear on drives and things like that. But then, just as Josh mentioned,
we're also collecting the web server metrics to see if you have a spike of activity, a bunch of requests, maybe some automated process that's hitting the REST API has gone wonky and is just constantly hammering the system. As much data as we can possibly collect, and that's something we're always fine-tuning and adding to.
That's right, and we use those metrics for not just optimizing, but if there's ever an issue where the application crashes, we can go back and look at kind of what was happening about the time that the instance crashed or had these performance issues. And then we can know kind of what to do from a support perspective in terms of getting that application back up and running in its optimal state.
Certainly, it's about fixing the root problem and not just treating the symptoms, throwing hardware at it or throwing whatever, but actually seeing what's going on, seeing the behavior of it, and attending to what the actual problem is.
500 specific data points per minute?
Yeah, and that's that's going to be something that we see across multiple instances. So if there's a very dense server that has a lot of instances running, testing and staging instances and production instances of multiple applications, there's a ton of data being collected on all those instances. And the whole goal with that is for us to provide really, really granular visibility into those systems so that if there is an issue that we know, up to the minute exactly what happened and which instance it happened with. Yeah,
and certainly, like I said, we're always adding to the data points that we're collecting, writing new plugins and scripts to gather more data. So 500 points, that's probably different today than it was when our new monitoring system.
Yeah, and then also all that data goes into systems that we expose to our customers as well. So for some of the more common metrics, what we do is we expose those to our customers in our support portal so they can look at the graphs and create custom views on, how did my instance perform over the course of a month? What did this specific metric look like over the course of time? And that helps them make great decisions in terms of when to scale their applications, when to add new hardware sometimes. And ultimately, it lets them have the power of that knowledge so they can make better decisions.
Certainly, we don't want to slow down our customers that want that raw data to make decisions themselves. And the flip side, we don't want to overwhelm our customers that aren't as technical. So we expose our common system metrics and things like that, but we can also do I don't want to call them custom one-off metrics, but we can essentially expose any graph, any chart that you want that we collect. So the data we collect on your metrics is our customers' data, and we don't hide that.
Yeah, I think of that as a custom dashboard where our customers can look into it and see any of those specific factors that are important to them. Out of all those checks that we're doing, not all of those are going to be relevant to the average administrator on a consistent basis. So they only have to, they're only presented with the information that they're actually going to, gain value from. And that's really the goal of the monitoring system.
Reduce the amount of noise.
That's right.
Gotcha. Well, speaking of noise, we want you all to make a lot of noise. We certainly want to hear from you. So this is your opportunity to ask these engineers from Contegix your questions about managing your Atlassian Stack. So open up that video screen. And the way you do that, you have the ability to toggle between speaker view and gallery view. So up at the top of your screen, if you select that, if you hover over that right-hand box, you'll see it has gallery view. You click it and you can toggle between different views that you can see other individuals who are in this video call as well. Hey, Matthew, it's great to see your face in here as well as Deepal. Good to see you here, and I hope that you guys can put some questions in the bottom of the screen because we want to make sure that we are tailoring this broadcast to meet your needs. So I have some questions about backups, data protection, and data recovery as well. They are huge topics in IT right now. As an Atlassian expert partner, do you see any unique challenges with these topics applied to Atlassian apps?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, you're exactly right though. Disaster recovery and backups and data protection is probably one of the biggest topics in IT now, and it will continue to be, as more people rely on technology and the data that these systems contain. So, there are some general, things to consider when you're approaching, backups and recovery and disaster recovery for any systems. And the Atlassian tools really fall into some of the more general approaches that are out there. But ultimately, it's going to come down to really two key factors. And, you probably heard about these two factors. They're your recovery time objective, your RTO, and your recovery point objective, your RPO. And Josh can explain a little bit about, what the RTO is, what the RPO is, and then we can talk a little bit about how some of our customers assess, how critical the data is.
Certainly. Essentially, you start off with DRs. There is no turnkey DR solution unless you would like to spend a lot of money. You need to evaluate exactly how much data you can stand to lose in a disaster, as in total catastrophe disaster, and decide exactly how long you can withstand being down for that data to be recovered to decide on a plan. If you need to have, within the last week of data, and that needs to be recovered within 2 weeks in the total event of, total catastrophe, that's actually not that difficult to get in place on, cost effectively. If you need to have real time where you can only sustain an hour or less loss and you have to be up immediately, then you have to talk about fault tolerance, active replication, not asynchronous, immediate. And depending on where you're replicating to, that might involve, dedicated pipes, that might involve, a lot more charges as far as the transit itself. So it's having that discussion first and determining exactly how critical the data is to your business, how long you can withstand without it, and then going from there.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, once again, we come back to this theme of layers. So any one of these approaches isn't going to be just a solution on its own. It really comes down to, how your company, relies on this data and what specific layers of protection we can put in place there. So, for example, you might have, as a development shop, you might use these tools as kind of like a copy of your data. And so it might be kind of trivial if, your application is down for a week and you can't access your data.
Yeah, and it might be acceptable to do, just an rsync of your data and database replication to a passive server, and that might be, fine if that's if that catches up as it goes along.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of our, mid-market companies, those companies that start to rely on this data more and it becomes more critical for them, they get into situations where, their recovery times can't be any more than, a couple days. And the recovery point means that, the data can't be any more than maybe an hour old. So that's when we start talking about some of these more active data replication tools and different approaches. And then, finally, we have those customers that, this entire set of tools are extremely critical to their business. A lot of the enterprise-sized companies, they have, hundreds, if not thousands of developers using these tools every day.
Yeah, if you're a software shop and the entire stack is unavailable for you, your business is essentially not working.
Yeah, that's right. So you've got, developers who can't access their tools. And, once again, if those tools are not available and the source code's not available, then it could cause serious financial impact. So those types of customers have a more active replication setup where they're going to have hot hardware in 2 different locations, and a set of fairly sophisticated sets of replication and rules for accessing that data.
Speaking of disasters, I hear the fire truck strategically timed in the background. Wasn't planned, right? Yeah, not at all. So you talk about a disaster recovery being a strategy and not necessarily a service. Go into that just a little bit and talk about what you mean by that.
Well, sure. Yeah. So the strategy aspect of this is, once you've assessed how critical the data is, you really have to determine, in order to meet those RTOs and RPOs, there's always going to be a specific budget, to do those types of services. So it could be that there's a simple, inexpensive solution for getting your data off-site. So Contegix provides a couple different services for that. We have an off-site tape backup. It's relatively low tech, but it's still pretty bulletproof in terms of its services. So we can put your data on an encrypted tape and send it offsite to be vaulted for a period of time. That gives you kind of the peace of mind of knowing that you have a secondary copy of the data that's offsite, so that if there is a disaster in the data center that affects a lot of systems, that at least the data itself is available, to be restored elsewhere. And then we also have another service that's relatively new, and it's really focused on getting the data from the Atlassian instances and getting that data offsite. So it doesn't rely on tapes. It relies on pushing the application data to another cloud service. And from that period, from when the data is in that cloud service, we can then restore it to another data center if required. So for example, if we have your instance and you have your Atlassian DR service with us, we're taking your Jira data, all the attachments and things of that nature, and we're sending it to the third, kind of cloud center. And then in the event that we'd have to restore that, we would be able to restore it to a disaster recovery facility like the one we have in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah. And so, you were talking a little bit more about some of the different ways that you would have the ability to get clients up and running then again after a disaster. So, and as you said, your plan is only as good as your testing, huh?
Yeah, that's right. So, once again, if you're asking those questions at the time of a disaster, you've kind of missed the boat. It's kind of brutal, in the event that you don't have a plan and you don't have a strategy and you need to get into one of these situations where the data needs to be restored. You're relying on things like data forensics to try to pull it from damaged hard drives and things of that nature. So kind of going back to that entire concept of having this as a strategy with layers, we definitely recommend our customers, have that kind of an ongoing strategy. And then, like you said, testing it. So that plan is only as good as your ability to test it out to make sure that it's going to work if you ever did have to use it. Nobody wants to use a disaster recovery, facility, for example. You never want to kind of fail over to a DR facility. But in the event that you had to, would you be able to do it? And would you be able to meet your RTOs and RPOs? And that all comes down to testing.
And it's important to do routine testing, not just test it when it's set up and then move on. But routine testing is services can change, data sets can change, expectations for that restoration. It's make sure you're continuously testing as your environment changes.
Yep, and that's really kind of an extension of this general idea that your backup is only as good as your ability to recover it.
Mm-hmm. And so how routine? What kind of timely basis are you recommending?
Yeah, so at a minimum, we recommend annually doing testing, and a lot of our customers work with us to go through and actually, do that full-scale restoration. Now, whether you choose to do that on a small piece of your infrastructure, or if you want to see what the full-blown restoration process would look like, we can do custom engagements with our clients where we can simulate that kind of a failover. And a lot of times those are longer-term testing. It's not something that you just flip a switch and it's good to go, but it requires a lot of effort and manual work to actually go through that testing.
Yeah. Are we talking, a complex environment with a bunch of interlinked services? Or are we talking about a single VM that has, a Jira instance on it? They're vastly different as far as validation and testing go.
Yeah, so the single VM might be something that we just restore from a backup, or test that tape recall service to pull it back into the data center to do the restoration. But if you have a full-blown environment with really critical applications, testing that once a year is something that we recommend. And if your internal policies dictate that you need to do this quarterly, we can also work with you there. Some companies can be very stringent about their testing policies.
And every budget's different, and you had mentioned that you have services to fit those budgets.
Yeah, that's right. We definitely recognize that a small independent development shop might not have the same budget as one of our enterprise customers. So looking at how critical the data is to them, we can typically find a solution with one or two different services that we offer where we can actually help them satisfy their RTO and RPO requirements.
Okay. So if I had to know, and I want to get some of the questions of the individuals who are in the Genie cast right now. So either go ahead and type them, or better yet, raise your hand. We would love for you to ask them in our chat as well. So raise your hand or let us know in chat that you have a question. We want to get to them. If we had to know one or two key things to keep in mind about managing our Atlassian tools, whether Contegix manages them or not, what would they be?
Two things I can recommend, or two, maybe more than that. Maintain a test for a staging instance, and try to keep as close to current as you can with your with the actual application version and your plugin versions. The biggest issues we see is legacy debt. Coming a couple versions behind, getting stuck on a couple plugins that are no longer developed, and then having to change your workflow as you upgrade your application. Staying close to current in the application, all your plugin versions really reduces the risk of having that.
Yeah, what goes along with that too is, as we're kind of working with clients, the first thing that Josh mentioned was having a dedicated staging environment. So we typically recommend, as long as the customer's budget allows, is for us to actually deploy something like kind of like a sandbox for them to do their testing and development on, so that they're not doing that on their production instances. And then the next thing is to do this dedicated staging environment where they can do some real quality assurance before they roll big changes out across the board.
And actually, everybody has a staging instance.
Everybody has a staging instance. A handful of people
are lucky enough to have a production instance as well.
That's true. That's a good point. It's funny, we joke about that, but we've all heard horror stories about people making a change to their production apps and it affecting a big group of people. And so one of the services that Contegix offers is the active management. So if you're looking to do an upgrade with your systems or something along the lines of getting a plugin installed or an add-on, leverage the Contegix service, if you're a Contegix customer, and our team will help you step through that. That might mean, deploying a specific upgrade to the staging instance and then turning it back over to the client to do some hardening and some testing to make sure that, not just the look and feel, but all the data links are there and everything works as expected. So, we can really, get pretty deep into the application in terms of the way we can support that for our clients.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. We still absolutely work hand in hand with our customers to make sure they're validating their workflows, their data sets. As we don't know your data as much as you know your data.
Yeah, that's right.
That's great. Well, Deepal, hi Deepal, I'm waving to you. Do you see me? I'm giving you a high five. Give me a high five back. There you go. You've got a question. Could you unmute your mic and ask it? You have a question for Josh and Don of Contegix. Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead, Deepal. Oh, he's not able to unmute. Okay, I gotcha. So we'll go ahead and ask his question. Deepal's question was, well, I'm not new to Jira. However, I'm now the Jira admin here at my company, and our new instance has been really slow. We have an IT team in the company, but they are not familiar with Jira. What would be the main things we would need to troubleshoot and look at to improve performance?
Definitely take a look at the memory settings of the application, the heap statistics of the JVM, seeing if you're having a heavy amounts of garbage collection, you need to add more resources, things like that. That'd be step one. What's also incredibly common is the database services. So Atlassian recommends Postgres. I think they still support MySQL. When you install those database services, they don't install tuned. They come with a very, very, very limited tuning set to ensure that it works in developed environments, things like that. So tuning the database service is incredibly important to ensuring its performance. The other thing I would look at is more workflow stuff. So if you have an incredibly complex workflow that goes through a lot of transitions, that's going to be a performance killer. Simplifying that as much as possible, streamlining that as much as possible, using these same kind of workflows between projects, those all help with performance tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also just that situation where you get thrust into the role as the Jira administrator is not an uncommon one. Sometimes we just find out that the lead developer then automatically just takes on the role of the Jira administrator. So one of the first things to do is take an inventory of what you have. So understand what versions you're currently running and understand which user plugins are installed. And then if there are any sort of things that we can recommend you do is just like anything else, take a look at those basic resource configurations. See if you have enough memory for the instance. See if you're bound by CPU, and start investigating from there. Sometimes it might be as simple as just changing some of the configurations, like Josh mentioned on the JVM itself, and that can resolve some of your issues.
Yeah, if you're having performance issues today, those things to take a look at are what I recommend. But maintaining that, it's incredibly important that you have a metric collection system so you can, again, see as the application is growing, see as your users are adopting it more, to make sure that you are tuning it as it grows.
That's right. And then also when you first kind of take on the role of an administrator with that, it's also important to check to see, make sure if there are any other external systems that are hitting Jira. So if there's a lot of API calls, or if there are systems that are running queries against the Jira database, those things can affect performance greatly, even though you don't see those as an administrator.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. We've seen some issues with a couple of customers, enterprise customers, that the Jira really expanded out through the organization very quickly, and a couple of the business analysts were running really heavy JQL queries, and were just hitting refresh and again and again and again and again, and not waiting for them to return, bringing the system down to its knees as database transactions kind of backed up and whatnot. So absolutely, log analysis is important as well. Without knowing the instance to begin with, I don't know where to point you at first. But
yeah, we'd love to hear about your challenges. If you want to ever take this, offline and kind of discuss, some of those things that you're confronted with, just reach out.
Great. Speaking of reaching out, David, reach out and give me a high five there. Go ahead, and you have a question for Josh or Don of Contegix.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
We can hear you.
Okay. I'm just curious on your recommendations on SSO implementations. And Windows AD environment specifically. I'm just curious if you guys
can you connect directly to it, or do you need to go through SAML?
Oh, what's that?
Can you connect directly to it to bind to Active Directory, or do you need to run through a SAML 2.0 provider?
I'm pretty sure we can get to it directly. It's all internal.
If you get to it directly and it's all internal, and you don't have a ton of complexity in your Active Directory groups and whatnot, I'd probably actually recommend the Atlassian product Crowd to maintain SSO. It actually works beautifully for the entire Atlassian stack. If you had to step through a SAML provider, because Crowd doesn't support SAML 2.0, we've had a lot of success with our customers in Okta at the moment. That's actually one of the big ones I recommend for if you need to step through a SAML provider.
Yeah, and that kind of authentication question is actually pretty common for us too. We see that in a lot of our cases where, businesses will have existing Active Directories they want us to connect to authenticate against, or, in some cases, how do we replicate that directory so that we have a local copy, to add resiliency? That's
actually what I was about to say is if you have a big Active Directory installation with a lot of OUs and groups and whatnot, filtering that on the search for your bind filters is incredibly important. You'll see some performance issues as you're running those full and incremental syncs. So limiting that to the scope of just the users that are going to be in the application is incredibly helpful if you have a bigger Active Directory installation.
Okay.
Also, if your Atlassian Stack exists in a data center outside your local office, I usually recommend dropping a read-only domain controller on the end of the stack in case you ever have VPN connectivity issues or link is dropped, something like that, so you don't lose authentication if you're fully delegating out.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
No problem.
Hey, Pamela, you have a question about Metaspace? Go ahead and ask it. We can hear you. Pamela, I don't know that she's able to ask her question, but I could ask it. She was wondering if the Metaspace has 0% free, is that a problem?
Yeah, if Metaspace has 0% free, I would probably say that you could increase the heap size a little bit there. Metaspace is part of the general heap in the JVM. The JVM section is up memory based upon Metaspace. It used to be, in Java 7 before, there used to be another thing, PermGen. That was for all the, what do you call it? But there's certain sections that the heap is split up into. Java 8 has a lot more, how do I want to phrase this? It's a lot more dynamic as far as where you can pull from and allocate. But if Metaspace is showing that it's completely fully utilized and you're seeing more garbage collection, if you're seeing some performance issues with the application, I think it's a great indicator that to start bumping heap up a little bit. If you're currently allocating a gig, 2 gigs, try bumping it up, 256, 512 megs steps as far as memory is concerned. If you're running more than 4 gigs of heap already, maybe going ahead and jumping in 512 or gig increments to see where your sweet spot's at.
And Josh, would you recommend looking at, making sure they're on a current version of Java as well?
Yeah, if they're running Metaspace, they're running Java 8.
Okay, so it's
Metaspace is new to Java 8. So yeah,
that's why Josh is here.
That's implied.
Sounds good. And Deepal, you have another question too. Are you able to talk, or would you like to put it in chat? We can hear you, Deepal, if you're able to talk. Okay, he wants to know, does Contegix work with internal company IT teams to maintain Jira environments? We are a public company and always want to keep things maintained within the company. So it would be great if Contegix would work with us on servers, et cetera, that we own and operate. And yeah, go ahead. He has a second question after that.
Okay, great. So the first question, that's kind of a tough one. Contegix, we deliver all of our services on servers within our data center. So right now we don't extend our services, for our support into other companies' data centers or into their own, third-party providers, things like that. All of our services are provided out of our facility. So whether that's a virtual machine, a private cloud, a dedicated server, those are all delivered from our data center.
Now, we do have customers that have the requirement that they have to own the hardware. So we do have some hybrid co-location customers that we still manage the instances for and things like that. But as far as internal to another company itself, we have some pretty aggressive SLAs around what we guarantee for power uptime, things like that, responsiveness, and they'd be very hard to meet if the equipment wasn't here close to us.
Yeah, and the other part about that too is that you don't have to give up control. So one of the things is even if we're deploying those servers in our data center, your IT team can still be authorized contacts on the account. They can still do their own monitoring. We don't restrict, for those customers to interact with the equipment.
Happy to give them shell accounts with, wheel access, pseudo access for whatever they need. Work with them to, allow them to use the server for other things. We don't try to get in their way. We try to be a partner, not necessarily a delegate and forget.
Deepal also wants to know, do you recommend Windows or Unix environments?
Linux, absolutely. Not to say that there's anything wrong with Windows, but the vast majority of instances out there run on Linux today. The vast majority of experience any Atlassian partner is going to have is going to be on Linux. The Atlassian Cloud runs Linux. So just from a troubleshooting standpoint, from a sticking within what's common, definitely Linux.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That being said, I have a couple of customers that have Windows requirements, and we run it behind IIS or Apache on Windows, and it runs just fine.
Gotcha. Well, Pamela also says that she upgraded to 7.1.4 and she's experienced some slowness, so she appreciates the suggestions that you gave to her earlier on how to resolve that.
I will say that the Jira upgrades, you definitely want to stay to current. There's a bunch of performance improvements in the later Jira versions, but like any other piece of software, as you add more features, as you add more things to the application, it is going to consume more resources. So as you're upgrading, it's a great chance to look at if you need to add more resources to the system or whatnot at that point.
Great. Well, so many great questions today. Josh and Don, so appreciate you joining us. If any of these individuals have more questions, where should they go to get answers?
Yeah, so they can just go to www.contegix.com. We've got some inquiry forms there. And then also, I think our information is also available on the website as well.
Okay, and Matthew has this question as well. Matthew, hey, go ahead and ask it. We can hear you.
Okay. So the new Jira 7 stack has in the application section, has a button you can click to say, upgrade my instance to whatever version Atlassian now has as the current version. How safe is that, and what precautions should you take before you click that button?
The number one precaution, make sure you have a full backup system. Is this an Atlassian cloud environment or is this standalone?
On-premise.
On-premise, okay. The first thing I would do, snapshot the VM, make sure you have a full backup, whatever your backup procedure is. We usually do a clone of the data on the file system and data we actually can roll back incredibly quickly in case of a failure. But that's step number one.
You should try it in your staging environment first.
Step number two. If you're not running that many plugins or custom workflows, or you're running plugins that are officially supported by Atlassian, even though they're not developed by Atlassian, I would say your chance of success for the upgrade working is higher. If you have a lot of customizations to your instance, I would expect it to fail. Or go through the upgrade process but have issues with how your data is being rendered and some TLC needing to be applied after the upgrade process or during the upgrade process. But if you're running a stock instance, I would have very high expectations of it working.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
Do it in staging.
Absolutely. Well, lots of great information today. We sure want to thank our speakers, Josh Boyven and Don West of Contegix. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us on how to manage your Atlassian environments. And thanks to all those great questions as well. High five to you in the boxes. So appreciate you joining us and contributing to the conversation. Yeah. Absolutely. Complete with the sound effects from disaster recovery, right? You got to like that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Sarah Hill from GenieCast. Have a great day. Hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we'll see you later.
Take care.